You are now streaming worldwide on RadioOnFire.com and the Radio on Fire app.
Welcome back, everybody. Radio on Fire, of course. Your man Dami K in here, and so much going on. Busy time, very, very fascinating time right now, and I am joined on the line by Mr. Clyde Boatwright. How you doing, sir?
How you doing, sir?
Good.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I wanted to have someone with your, wealth of knowledge on some of the things that are going on right now. Of course, your background being what it is. I guess for people that are unfamiliar with who you are, please introduce yourself and what you do.
So my name is Clyde Boatwright. I'm a lifelong Baltimore resident. Currently a police sergeant with Baltimore City School Police, where my assignment is I am the elected president of the Fraternal Order of Police, which is a union that represents school police officers. I also have a second role where I am the vice president of the Maryland State Fraternal Order of Police, which is the statewide union for police officers, and we represent over 22,000 members statewide, active and retired.
All right, so you definitely are in the mix. So, is there a difference between officers who are at a school versus an officer who is on the street?
Yeah, so I'll give the example that I have to give sometimes to older police officers that don't understand. It's no different than having a doctor that works at Johns Hopkins versus a doctor that works for Bond Secura. It's just two different hospitals, two separate entities, but they're both doctors. So for us, school police is its own police department. It was founded in 1967. It's been around, and what we do in school police, we primarily patrol the immediate environs of the school, which is the immediate location of the school, which is the grounds, the interior and exterior of the school. That's our primary area of responsibility. However, school police officers have dual certifications, meaning a school police officer can issue a traffic ticket, and we have what's called concurrent jurisdiction with Baltimore City Police, meaning that a school police officer can answer a 911 call to a particular area anywhere in the city of Baltimore and enforce laws and issue traffic tickets and parking tickets and everything else like that.
All right. So as far as it's so difficult to find a starting point. But as far as the unrest in the city, as an officer and a lifelong resident of Baltimore, can you understand some of the pain and the anguish with the citizens?
Absolutely. I grew up in Sandtown, Winchester. I'm a product of Matthew Henson Elementary School, Lamell Middle School, and Carver High School. I understand the pain. I'm not tone deaf to the cries of the public. And what's different now, which is not as opposed to 2015, which is different now is people in Baltimore actually see the plan. Meaning, you have a lot of people from out of town that want to come here and get stuff started and burn down and create havoc. And I'm so proud of the citizens of Baltimore that stepped up this last time and started pointing them out and saying, "Nah, man, where you from?" And they're from Jarrettsville. They're from, other areas, surrounding areas, some as far as Cleveland, Ohio. I saw one person posting saying, "Hey, I flew into Baltimore just to see what's going on from Cleveland, Ohio." So people have come because of what happened in 2015, as though this could be a place that they can actually kick stuff off and damage and destroy a lot of property. Was there some damage? Was there some property? Yes, and it's understandable. But the way that our colleagues over at the City Police handled the protesters, they'll allow people to speak their mind, and there was, from what I could see, there was not a lot of escalation on either side.
Right. Yeah. Same here. That's what I saw for the most part. For Baltimore, it was good because it could have, like you said, it could have been a lot worse. From your experience, and this may be a difficult question, but from your experience, what is the procedure for two officers, for an officer to point out something that another officer may be doing wrong within the course of interaction with the public?
So most police departments should have a duty to intervene policy, meaning as though if you see another officer doing something that they're not supposed to do, that you should intercede. You should step in the middle and stop them. I know my police department, school police, we have that in our policy, that by policy, you must stop another police officer from doing something that you perceive as wrong, even though that person could be acting in official capacity. And I think that if people take their oath serious and they address those type of situations that they see, then maybe you'll start to see a downward spiral of less complaints because they know that other people or their peers are watching.
When you saw the horrific video of George Floyd's last moments, what were your thoughts?
I'll be honest with you, I cried. I mean, it brought tears to my eyes, man. To see a grown man begging and pleading for air for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, that's a very long time. I just don't know where it's acceptable behavior for a human being to deprive someone and torture them the way that I saw on that camera. That's just my perception. That's not the perception of any organization that I may be a part of or represent. This is me as a man speaking. What I saw, I did not like. I thought that there was some other factors that had to go along with that. And it's still no justification to kneel in that position. Because you're trained, even if a person is overdosing, even if a person is experiencing excited delirium, the worst place you want to have a person is prone on their stomach with their hands restrained behind their back. You have to sit them up to allow the airway to open up. And putting your knee across the neck to stop the flow of air and blood to the brain is just not something that's taught anywhere in any police academy. And I thought that it was a crime. And I felt as though that officer knew exactly what he was doing when he was kneeling on George Floyd's neck.
So going back to what you said, you kind of touched on my next question. So the knee to the back or the knee to the neck, it is or it is not something that's taught in the academy? Well,
each jurisdiction is different. I mean, that could be something that they're taught in Minneapolis, and I'm just not aware of it. I just know when you're trained to restrain someone, and I've worked in institutions, in jail institutions, in the jail setting. When you have, and I've worked at Johns Hopkins Hospital where we dealt with mental patients on a regular basis before I was a police officer. You're never trained to restrict someone's airway like that for that period of time. 8 minutes, and if you look at the video, and if you're able to sit and watch, and being a student of policing, I had to sit through it and watch that, even though it was horrific. Even when the medics came and they attempted to gain a pulse, once they checked for a pulse and said that there was no pulse there, he still, for another 2 minutes, kneeled on his neck. He never relieved the pressure for an additional 2 minutes. So that was also problematic for me. As a trained professional, I just know that was unacceptable and it shouldn't have occurred the way that it did.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one difference that I noticed in the past, the FOP was not quick to side with the officer in the way that I have seen in other instances. What do you think the reason is for that?
Well, so there's a misconception about police unions that we protect bad officers. And, what we protect is the process, the due process. It's no different.
Meaning that you protect all officers?
No. We protect a police officer's right to due process. If they are criminal and they did something wrong, then they must face the criminal process. And the FOP is not representing them during the criminal process. I could tell you countless times where officers in some FOP organizations like mine, if you're charged with a criminal offense that would go outside of the district court, let's say if it was going straight to circuit court, like a felony offense, you would have to come before our board and petition to have your attorney fees paid. Most times we don't pay attorney fees for people that are charged with crimes. The FOP doesn't pay for that.
But you will come out and publicly lobby for the officer.
Well, it's not publicly lobbying. It's protecting the due process rights of the person involved.
Meaning that you don't want to pronounce them guilty, or you're trying
Correct.
to say that they get their day in court, that type of thing.
Correct.
Okay. So as it relates to what happened in Atlanta, and of course we're speaking about other jurisdictions, but I guess the main problem that I have is the decision making of the officers in the heat of the moment. You know what I mean? More not really in the George Floyd case. Let's talk more about the Atlanta case with Mr. Brooks. So when you have a situation and it's up to an officer's discretion, but is there some type of general playbook that y'all are operating from, or is everybody just freewheeling and just doing whatever?
So the officer that actually discharged his weapon in that situation, when you are faced with a deadly force situation, it's to protect the life of another or yourself. And I'm reading stuff out of Atlanta it's very confusing. Whereas the police officers used the taser a week before on some college kids in a car, and it was deemed to be excessive force.
Correct.
2 officers were terminated. 6 officers were charged. And one of the charges was a criminal use of the taser as a deadly weapon. And now the district attorney is now saying that the taser is not a deadly weapon. So he's confusing himself a week apart when trying to fit the round peg in a square hole as it relates to how they fit with these 2 different cases. Taser is either a dangerous weapon or deadly weapon, or it's not. Typically, the police officer who uses deadly force, if they're using it to protect themselves or another, if they're placed in that immediate fear, there's a lot of responsibility with being a police officer and carrying that role and that title. And with that role, you have the ability to take someone's freedom, and in a split second, you have the constitutional authority to take someone's life. And that should not be taken lightly. Everyone, when you sign up, you want to go back home. And studies have shown, and I know it's taught, 20 years ago it was taught to me, if someone was to disarm you and take your gun, they're more likely than not, they're going to use it. They're going to use it on you. If they take your gun, they're going to shoot you. And so you never want someone to either point a weapon, disarm someone, whether it's disarming them of pepper spray, disarming them of an expandable baton, or the less than lethal electronic device, which is the taser. You don't want anyone to disarm you, because if they incapacitate you, now they have the ability to take that weapon from you and use it against you.
All right. Couple of things I want to push back on. All right.
Okay.
When are you taught to use a taser versus pepper spray or versus your service revolver?
So in most police departments, they use what's called the use of force continuum. It's usually your presence is the first deterrent, voice commands, hands or feet or knees or elbow strikes. Those are all acceptable uses of force above verbal commands. Then you're taught to use the pepper spray. You're taught to use the baton. You're taught to use the taser. You're taught to use the firearm. All of that, you don't have to go step by step.
Right.
So the way that it's taught is you're supposed to repel force with force. Meaning, if you show up to a location and you have a person that's actively fighting, you can use your baton or your pepper spray or your taser, because they are throwing hands. But if you pull up and someone has a baseball bat and they're actually using a baseball bat, that is a deadly weapon, and you can now use deadly force against that person. You're able to go a level up above the force that you're being threatened with, or another person is being threatened with, up to and including the use of the firearm, which is the last line of defense in a deadly force encounter.
So, using that philosophy, if the taser was taken from the officer as it was, the next level up is his service weapon. So,
that's correct.
Are you saying that he was justified?
So I'm not.
Or was it a thought process that you can understand, considering the circumstances that we saw, that he took it to the next level?
I can understand how he would perceive the taser as a threat. Once the taser was pointed and discharged, I could understand why he leveled up and went to deadly force. I understand that. There have been cases where it did not end in a deadly force encounter.
Right.
There's a lot of discretion given, and I think part of this where we're missing the point is there's not people standing in front of cameras like we're having this conversation and giving an explanation of how these processes go. We don't have people that are courageous enough. Your police chiefs, your elected sheriffs, your administrators are not saying that this is what happens when these situations occur. This is I'm a big proponent of a citizen police academy, where a citizen will come in and they'll experience situations similar to what police training is, and they're put in those situations and given multiple options on how to react. Once you start doing those type of things and opening up the process so people can see, then you'll have people people will then have an understanding of why or how things progressed, and how things escalated. And at some point you can't go back down to de-escalate a situation until you gain control. Use of force or deadly force is the last option. It's the very last option. It's the last option that every police officer should take. However, there are certain circumstances where the officer cannot chance getting hit with the taser, incapacitated, and his gun taken and used on him, his partner, or anybody else on the street that's in the surrounding area. Now, if you watch that video, and I've watched the body cam video, everybody was cordial throughout the whole encounter.
Including the citizen.
Including the citizen. I think that, it's unfortunately, when you look at the stat, and you got some police officers that their expertise is alcohol, DWI. There's some people that's their forte, that's their expertise. If you notice, the first officer initially said, "Man, just go ahead and pull over and sleep it off." And then when he walked away to go back and get in his car, unfortunately, Mr. Brooks went back to sleep in the driveway. So now he's not coherent enough to actually go and take that option of sleeping it off. And so he's now committing a crime by being in operation of a motor vehicle, by being under the influence. So what has to happen is there's so many DWI cases or DUI cases have been thrown out because you didn't go through all of the steps. You had to get a certified standard field sobriety test administered. Right. And that's what the second officer was. He was certified in administering those tests. So that officer went through the series of tests, which is required. You're required to answer those questions. You're required to document what you're seeing. If some people thought it was like he was kind of being ignorant and rude when he was saying stuff like he's swaying. But that's archiving it for the body camera that was rolling. He's not able to maintain his steps. He does not know that he believes he's in Forest Park, Georgia, which is 16 miles away, which is another city, 2 cities over. He was not capable of operating a vehicle because he didn't even know where he was.
True. So, I mean, what you're saying is it makes sense, except for the fact that Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms fired him. Mm-hmm. So something in the process of the officer had to be wrong. or at least deem that's wrong. But everything that you're saying seems like he did everything right.
So what happens is people that are not a part of, like, elected officials feels as though that, you know, it's for the greater good. And I had this conversation with another city leader recently, and we were going back and forth trading comments on Facebook. And I said, you know, unfortunately, the wrongful termination lawsuit may yield that police officer a lot more money than, unfortunately, Mr. Brooks' family might get. Because what happens is you quiet a crowd by saying, I fired him. But then as a elected official, you can go to sleep at night saying, I fired them, and you quieted the citizens. But a couple of months later, a judge now says that you didn't offer them that due process. You didn't give them the appropriate hearing. You didn't follow this step. You didn't follow that step. And those cases are then overturned in court. And then there's a judgment of all the back pay. And now there's a judgment for pain and suffering and all of those different things. So what happens is you're trying to keep the lid on the city and the city from burning by just saying, I fired him. And then 6 months down the line or a year down the line, we're back to the same thing. And then people will say, well, the union got him off, or the city dropped the ball because he got his job back. Well, you shouldn't have terminated him in the first place. Give him due process. And I want to be clear to your listeners, nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop. Get rid of him. Get him out of our profession. But you got to do it the right way. You got to follow the process.
I would love to sit here and believe that the process is set up in a way that can happen. Mm-hmm. But the bar is so high for this supposed beloved due process. I don't know how we can get there without, some reform.
I've been representing police officers for 12 years. It's very easy to fire a cop if it's done the right way.
And when you say fire, like fire in Baltimore City, and now you can go to Montgomery County.
No. So as a part of my role as the vice president of the Fraternal Order of Police, we have a seat on the Maryland State Fraternal Order of Police of the Police Training Commission. The minute, see, this is you're getting exclusive stuff on how things work here.
I love exclusives.
Yes. So how things work, if a person is fired as a police officer, their certification is flagged. That certification does not belong to the individual police department, and it doesn't belong to the individual. It belongs to the Maryland Police Training Commission. The Maryland Police Training Commission is the overall governing body. The minute there's a separation, whether you retire, you resign, or you're terminated, there's a form that the police department has to send, and it says with or without prejudice. If it's with prejudice, meaning you left under investigation, you were being, terminated, those are the two terms that gives you under with prejudice definition. There's a little flag that's put on that. So the next time another police department applies for certification under that social security number, the commission will say, no, we're not giving you a provision because you left the previous agency or you were terminated by a previous agency for just cause. So now a police chief, not the assistant chief, not the sergeant, not the lieutenant, and definitely not the police union, has to stand in front of the training commission and say, I'm hiring this guy because I looked at the case that he was terminated for, and he would not have been terminated for that at this police department, and I want to put my name to hiring this person and bring them on. And then the person leaves the commission room, and then there's a vote taken amongst police chiefs, the state's attorney general's office, Maryland State Police commander, members of the commission. It's a room full of people that makes that determination on whether or not that person is recertified or not. And a lot of times they're not. The certification, well, you cannot be recertified, and then you have to sit out for 4 years and wait to try to be recertified again. It happens all the time.
So, amid all of the unrest that's going on, and I do understand that a lot of officers are working more with the climate, but there has been a push or some branding for defunding the police. From where you and your colleagues sit, what type of What do you feel about that kind of movement, defund the police?
I think that it's a knee-jerk reaction. You have, and look, I get it, elected officials. Again, I go back to my statement. Who is not sitting before you having these conversations? Police chiefs, elected sheriffs, people that are in decision-making power, because they're going to do what they're asked to do by the people that hire them, and that's usually a mayor or a town administrator or someone like that. I think that if you peel back the onion on that, it wasn't police officers or police departments that took money from Rex and Parks in the first place. Those funds were reallocated by elected officials. It wasn't the police departments that are not funding mental health and other services. Those were elected officials that made those decisions. And now you're going to the same people that caused the problem and asking them to fix the bigger overarching systemic issues in our community. How long have we in Baltimore, and I remember you being in Baltimore as long as I can remember, how long have we been talking about jobs? How long have we talking about urban blight? How long have we been talking about rec centers? Who got rid of the PAL centers? That was a useful tool in Baltimore City. So how long are we going to talk about these systemic issues and wait for it to boil over and come to a head? And now there's a push to do all of these different things. I noticed, I think there was a measure or a question in about defunding the crime lab of Baltimore police. We got 300 murders a year in the city. And these crime lab people are taking photos and gathering evidence at these crime scenes every day. And you want to take money from them? Come on, let's stop with the platitudes. Let's stop with the shifting of the moving the goalposts. There are realistic problems in policing, and reform is on its way, whether we like it or not. But there are police departments that have reformed and changed the way that they've done business. Let's look at best practices. Let's look at recruitment. Let's look at retention, and then you'll start to see better quality of policing when people start investing in the right types of things. Because right now you got police officers in some agencies making $18 an hour, but they're expected to put their life on the line and defend you and I. And the police department think that it's okay to pay them that little bit of money. So, you've had this fight going on for a long, long time, and it's always a shifting of the priorities. Oh, it's the state's problem, it's the city's problem, it's the local jurisdiction. Somebody needs to step up and take the bull by the horns and say, hey, you know what? We have a problem, and it's a recruitment and a retention problem.
All right, that part is fair. So the Baltimore City Council, the Budget Committee is approving $22.7 million in cuts to police and prosecutors. So measures are going to defund the Marine unit and disband the mounted unit. What effect would something like that have?
I think both of those units are useful tools. I know that as recent as 2 to 3 weeks ago, you had people fall in the harbor on a regular basis.
Yes.
And the Marine unit is there to scoop them out before they drown. So I think the mounting unit has some definite good use when it comes to crowd control. We have we have a number of different parades and large gatherings for crowd control. And the mounting unit is not there for horses to trample on people, so that has never happened. It's just a crowd control technique that police departments have used going back hundreds of years. Where it's just a part of our culture to use mounted in the Marine unit, and sadly, if those units go away, I'll be sad to see them go.
So the Democratic nominee for mayor, Brandon Scott, says that he wants to propose tens of millions of dollars in cuts to the police in a multi-year plan. He says that he wants the police and the fire department to share a Marine unit. Are you opposed to that?
Well, again, from the school police perspective, we don't have control over either one. I mean, if push comes to shove and we need one of them as a resource, I think that they're both great. But I would be, talking out of school if I've commented on those issues that relates to another local department that is not under my purview.
We were talking about elected officials and politicians. That was a very political answer you just gave right there. But yeah, I respect that.
No, I do have a great working relationship with Dickey, who was the president of the fire department, and Sergeant Mancuso, who's the president of the Baltimore Police. And if those guys want to comment on those issues, that's under their watch and not under mine.
There hasn't been a loud cry for it here, but I see it in some other cities. Some schools calling for people to cut ties with the police. How would something like that affect you?
Well, it would directly affect us, as that is our primary responsibilities. But if you recall, if we're going back to 2016, we had a national incident that was high profile that garnered a lot of attention. The incident that happened over at the Lake Clifton Breach Partnership School, with the student that spit on the police officer and the video of the officer retaliating against the student, where he was criminally charged, paid for his own lawyer, and went through the criminal process and ultimately resigned. From that, the fallout from that was exactly what happened to us. They defunded us. They took 40 positions from our police department that we have not refilled. So they downsized our police department. We structurally changed the way our policies are written. We structurally changed the way we operate. At one point, during a certain period, we had arrest data that showed 1,000 arrests a year. Now we're down to 36 arrests per school year. So, I mean, some of the training that our officers voluntarily signed up for, and it was a collective agreement between the union. It was a collective agreement between the chief of police. There was a collective agreement between the administration of the Baltimore City school system that we were going to change the way we did business. And that's exactly what we did. We started attending de-escalation training. We started attending childhood trauma training. We started attending implicit bias training, mindfulness training. So I'm trying to think of some of the other training. Our officers, we all started to be certified in stress management and how to deal with internal and external stresses. So going through those different trainings has changed the way we operate. We no longer respond to little Johnny in the hallway and don't want to get out of the hallway, or little Johnny down in the hallway shooting dice at a dice game. That's not a police response. That is an administrative issue. And over the last few years, the partnership has worked out well.
Some people have been calling, at least in the defund the police movement, I've heard various things. Everybody is not on the same course with the branding, not on the same page. Some people want to replace the police. Mm-hmm. Some people want to just take money away from them and reallocate those funds to other professionals. Is that something that you think would be a good idea?
Well, I think that what's happening is a lot of times people depend on the police for everything. My neighbor won't get out of my parking spot is not a police matter.
Right.
My cousin, who I let stay on my couch, won't leave the house because I told him to get out. Should not be a police matter. If your cousin won't leave and you allow them to stay there, you need to go and do an eviction. That's not a police matter. So if society would stop depending on the police for every little thing, there's a hotline that the city pays for. It's 311. It's called non-emergency. That's a non-emergency situation. There are times that situations appear to be harmless, and they escalate quickly. Who I'm curious to say when they say defund police and shift it to mental health, everybody doesn't need mental health. It's just certain communities that will benefit off those tax dollars. But let's be honest. If my uncle, who is having a mental health episode, leaves out of the house with no clothes on, he's completely naked, and he's having a mental health episode, and he's 265 pounds and 6'3", who do I want to respond to stop him? Do I want some doctor that's going to come and take 20 minutes to come from out of town to make it here? So are we talking emergency response teams that are going to come there? How are they going to get there? Are they going to drive emergency vehicles? How do we get these mental health people there? Because ultimately, when he starts smashing car windows because he's having a mental episode, or when he becomes a danger to himself, it's the police who will then take him into custody, put handcuffs on him, calm him down, put him in the back of a medic, and take him to a doctor to get help. So these are the type of things that we need to be curious about when we start talking about defunding and where the dollar should go, and don't call police for these types of calls. We're not there to hurt someone. Our police officers are coming in order to get someone the help that they need. And I get the whole thing about restructure and reform. If that's the ultimate goal, if we're going to restructure and reform, let's put it all on the table and have an open discussion. But from what I hear, it's the abolished police that are behind the defund police people. So those are the people that want police absolutely gone.
But I think that abolish just means replace. Abolish is such a final word, but they just mean, you have to have some type of a law enforcement mechanism. So I guess that they would be trying to replace the police with something else. I don't think that is the right move.
So what is the alternative? My question would be, what is the alternative? I'm not in a financial position to just say, I quit my job today, and how do I pay my bill without an alternative? You don't leave one thing until you have a suitable replacement. That's the analogy I'm trying to draw here. What's the suitable replacement to traditional law enforcement? If, we all agree that there are, in the 1980s, crack cocaine was dropped in our communities, and there became this war on drugs.
Right.
We're finding out that the war on drugs should be treated as a health epidemic as opposed to a criminal epidemic, after we've seen decades and decades of people's lives ruined either by overdose, by drug possession, convictions. People can't get viable jobs. So those are systemic issues that have nothing to do with the police, but police are trained to stop the drug trade, because what happens from the drug trade? We get violent assaults, shootings, and murders. And so it's the police to stop those types of things. And I think that the war on drugs, and which is a part of the overall picture, needs to be evaluated and put in the right context and the right form. Because if you're going to now send people to training, to treatment as opposed to sending them to jail, they're taken out of the hands of police. Don't call us when we see open air drug markets. If that's what the goal is, leave us out of it.
That it's difficult, because you speak from the perspective of a good cop. And there's so many issues that we haven't touched on, and I know we don't have time to, but there's some other factors here. There's racism that plays the part. There's temperament, and I think that may be the biggest issue, because we bump into people who are racist all the time, and you may not even know. But temperament is really the biggest issue that I have with the way policing happens. How to do what, people with chips on their shoulders, people with just the reaction. I've never seen a scenario where I've heard cops say, he shouldn't have did that. Even on this call, you haven't really, aside from the officer who murdered George Floyd, you haven't really said that this officer should have did that, or and officers don't, not picking on you, but officers don't do that. There's a gang mentality from the standpoint of, I got my guy's back or my girl's back, and whatever they did, I'm going to explain it.
Well, no, and it's not that. I'm not going to explain it, but
or justify it.
No, it's not even that. You have to put yourself in those positions, and you try to think about the tools that you have. Now, granted, we touched on the Atlanta case. Were there other tools available to the police officer? Could they have taken his license and tried to allow him to drive home? I have heard stories of police officers that told someone, "Hey, man, park your car. I'm gonna hold on to your keys. Call me when you sober up. I'll give you the keys back." And then the officer is called into internal affairs and said, oh, well, yeah, you stole that man's car keys. What was your intent? And he was like, I was trying to get the guy a break and send him home. Or I had somebody to come get him. And then he goes home and beat his wife. And then the wife says, well, the police pulled him over. He was already drunk and they let him come home and beat me up. So it's like, it's damn.
There have been scenarios like that.
Yeah.
I mean, they took Dylan Roof to Burger King. I know we were at Wendy's. I mean, there's so many different scenarios.
So let's touch on that. You have 2 police officers shot in Baltimore in the last 2 weeks, and both of those suspects were taken into custody without being injured. See, but we don't want to talk, people glance over the fact that, it's not a widespread thing. Everybody that's African-American that shoots a cop or that hurts somebody is not killed in a police confrontation. Sometimes those situations dictate a use of force. And sometimes I know people from my neighborhood that said, man, I ain't never going back to jail. If the police stop me, I'm holding court in the street. And that's the mindset. And some people do that. But then we have a whole crowd of people that say, oh, well, why did they do him like that? Well, in his mind, he wasn't going back to jail.
That's fair. That's fair. And you're right. To me, it's almost like the father who says, look at all the stuff I'm doing. I'm taking care of my kids, right? And we're like, okay, he wants a pat on the back for something that he's supposed to do. But I do understand there's not enough highlight to when things go correctly. So that is something that has to be worked on.
My pushback is, let's stop all the dancing, because that's, all the, cops and videos dancing, all of that stuff, cooking hot dogs and shooting basketball and playing football, when it's all said and done, you have 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 8 in the case of those fools here in Baltimore that are now federal prison. You have some people that make the whole profession look bad, and all of the good stuff that you try to do is all tossed out of the window because you were over exaggerating. Now, I said this on my social media the other day. If you're a police chief or a police department and you're trying to get respect from your community now in the middle of a time of crisis, you're too far behind. Those relationships should have already been built, and it's time for leadership. What happened in Minneapolis to George Floyd is a leadership problem. Why is it a leadership problem? Because you had one officer who had 18 complaints in the 3-year period. Why was there no flag to say, hey, you know what? We're getting all these type of complaints from this guy. Maybe he is a little rogue, but what did Minneapolis police do? They gave him 2 trainees, 3 days out of the academy, and those trainees were on that call. That is a problem.
That's
a problem. No way in hell as a police leader that I'm giving a guy with 18 complaints in 3 years 2 trainees, not 1, and that's a whole nother industry standard. You never give a person 2 trainees. But I'm gonna give them 2 trainees, and now those 2 guys are now federally indicted or criminally indicted. Criminally indicted for the murder of a citizen.
But that is not the only place that this happens. But the deeper issue is the amount of times that's happened where you've had bad officers who become the teachers of these new officers, and they teach them to do what? To do the same things that they do. And then that's how you have a bunch of bad behavior throughout the nation.
Well, that starts with self-policing yourself, because you know what? I have a 19-year-old son that drives a car every day. I have a 14-year-old son. I have a 25-year-old daughter out there. And those 3 kids could be stopped at any time. And I would want somebody to treat my kids the way that I'm going to treat someone else's kids. And if they're not treated that way, then there's a process that you go through. You file a complaint. You see that complaint all the way through. And if you're not being heard, then you take it to your elected officials. But, at some point, we got to stop mixing having elected officials trampling on the process and let the process take place naturally, because then you'll see that most police departments have an early warning system that if a person is getting out of line and they're starting to get these certain amount of complaints, they're going to reel that person in. And then that's when the discipline starts. I know as a person, I had 18 officers under me when I was on the street. And I had to be responsible for each one of them every day. And I had to know exactly what they were doing, and I had to understand my people's tendencies. And once you start seeing their tendencies and you know what's going on, you cannot be, as a supervisor, you can't be a friend. Your job is to protect the oath of that position that you're in, and your job is to ensure that your people are doing the right thing. That's why we have supervisors, and everybody's just not an officer.
Yeah, that's fair. Last question: how can we get the relationship between the citizens and officers? How can we get that at a better place?
Let's stop dancing on camera. Let's get the chiefs of police and the sheriffs from out there talking to our communities. Let's have our leaders lead. Too many times it's let's leave it to the unions to fight this battle. Let's have realistic, courageous conversations, and let's agree to disagree sometimes. I allow people that I don't agree with or don't fundamentally agree with to have conversations with me, because you know what? I'm evolving. That helps me evolve. That helps me understand what the community wants. Because the police department is the people's department. And people don't understand that. We work for them. We work for the community. And we're not guardians or gods ruling over people. We work for you. We're your sub. We're public servants. And when we get that mindset when the citizens start to realize that we work for them and we're not there to rule over them, then you'll start to see the relationship change. Because at this point, the one thing our police officers have to deal with right now, and I know your listeners can see this, is as soon as you get out of the car, you have one of these in your face.
Yeah. And
everywhere you move, you have one of these in your face, and they're yelling at you, they're talking to you, they're using all kinds of profanity, because everybody wants that gotcha moment that I can have and put on social media when I catch somebody doing something wrong. Instead of the officer being focused on whatever the task is at hand, they're focused on their cell phone, they're trying to give a reaction, and there's too many distractions. Let's have our leaders lead. And let's have open dialogue and open conversations. I think that members of the public should be able to look into the police department and see how things are run. And then maybe most people will have a better understanding on why some of the decisions are made the way that they are.
That's fair. That's fair. I noticed that you're hard on the officers dancing and the acts of social media silliness. I think it's probably their attempt to appear relatable, but you don't seem to like that.
Well, let me tell you why. Because I know that there's another way. There's a way to build relationships. Because you know what, that 15 minutes you spend on that, dancing and all that, you built a relationship with that one or two people that's in that area, and it looks good for social media. It's good PR. But in the next 2 days, you're going to ride by those people and just honk your horn. You're not going to get out and say, "Hey, Dante, how you doing, man? When I talked to you the other day, you said your grandmother was going to the doctors. What happened at the doctor?" "Oh, Officer Boatwright. Oh, she good. Her knee getting operated on. All right, man, I'll see you tomorrow. Hey, Dante, what are you doing? What school you going to next year?" So now those are the types of relationships that you have to build, as opposed to spending 5 minutes tossing the ball back and forth and dancing to the electric slide and looking good in your uniform so you can get a bunch of likes and saying, "Look at you, community policing." That's not community policing. Getting to know your people and building relationships with community policing. And I think that's where it starts.
Absolutely. I appreciate you talking with me about this. This is definitely, a sensitive subject at a time of heightened concern from everybody, from officers and citizens alike. So I really thank you for speaking with me.
Well, I thank you for having me, and I hate that it's times when there's a tragedy that we have to come out. We just have to continue these conversations, and I think that it's important that we get out in front and have these open conversations and dialogue with our members of the community. And I think that we'll all fare out better. I think police officers, we are not tone deaf to the needs of the community. We're not, we're not blocking out the fact that there are some things that need to change, but we are listening. We hear you, and it's just give it some time. I think that in some cases there is too much emotion right now for us to come to a consensus. But when we stop yelling, we'll be able to root out and sort out all of the stuff in the wash. And I think that, our better days are ahead, but we are in a rough patch right now with this pandemic, this global pandemic, and these issues with racism that are now being seen. I think eventually we will all work out in the end.
Absolutely. Again, we've been speaking with Mr. Clyde Boatwright here on the Diamond K Show. I'll be back tomorrow, 12 noon. Of course, people missing the episodes of the show, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Music, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or radioonfire.com. And thanks again. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks, Mr. Boatwright.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to your listeners.